Thinking specifically about that 14th Amendment, and you acknowledge it's true that when the Constitution was written, it was written not lightly, but with seriousness, so that it wasn't easily going to be changed. And when we read that 14th Amendment, and it refers to three parts: the due process, the equal protection, and then this other thing that's the hot topic, the citizenship clause. Now when politically it's being raised, we don't need to discuss all of the politics of it, but if they are saying that the 14th Amendment is just fine, just take out that little last line of the citizenship clause that makes those people who are born here no longer just likely to be citizens because they were born here. What happens if you just decide that you are likely to just take out or delete that final little line? That's still the Constitution. Is that done something that could be done so lightly? I know that they've raised the issue for 10, 12, many more years. How easy is it to just delete that one minor line?
Well, it's not that easy. You have to have someone in Congress sponsor legislation to amend the Constitution. It's not that easy at all. Or they can create a bill.
And even if it's after the bill is passed, it becomes the act of the Congress that they want to amend it, which the president could veto or sign. Mm-hmm. Then it has to get ratified by 2/3 of the states. And to change that line, as you suggested, instead of enforcing the law, is not the way you should be legislating in the United States.
Well, what ultimately happens is, because it's so difficult to change equal protection under the 14th Amendment, you have numerous cases being litigated, okay? So that's the way you get around it. And eventually this issue will be litigated
and there's
in the courts.
A lot of precedent, which is case law decided by the United States Supreme Court, that would all be opened up to new interpretation depending on how many lines you want to change in the 14th Amendment. Mm-hmm. It's not broken, the 14th Amendment. Enforcing the laws, maybe, but the 14th Amendment is not broken. And how would you define citizenship? If it's not someone who's born in the United States, what is going to become the definition of citizenship? We're going back to the Dred Scott case?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess this points or underscores the idea that if you think you're going to repeal that 14th Amendment, you better think again, because there's good reason for you not to open up that can of worms.
Not in our lifetime,
No.
I doubt.
But it certainly makes good political fodder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So of that 14th Amendment, when people talk about the due process clause, we're not talking about immigration yet, but so if your due process is likely to be challenged, if you want to say I'm not being given the opportunity to due process, what does that actually mean, and what does someone do about it?
That due process plainly is your right to be heard. Mm-hmm. That's the plain meaning of it, your right to be heard.
The substantive due process and
Yeah.
procedural due process. And Jackie's giving you that procedural due process thing that goes back decades
Yes.
on what your rights are. And we've talked about this a little in the past, but procedural due process is when can the government, and it's a government act that's involved, 14th Amendment, a state act. So if the state says that we are taking away a benefit, do they have to give you a hearing before they take away the benefit or after? Mm-hmm. And that's all case law that's been decided depending on what kind of right or benefit's being taken away, a fundamental right, and a very important right. There was a case, Goldberg versus Kelly, in the United States Supreme Court that talked about taking away welfare benefits. And the court said in that case, that's what people need to live on. And if you take that away without a pre-deprivation hearing, as they called it, then people may not be able to live. And so you have to give them a hearing before you do that. Whereas in Rhode Island, for example, you're driving on the street, you are pulled over, asked to take a breathalyzer, you don't take the breathalyzer. Can they take away your license at a hearing before you're heard on whether or not you violated the law? And the answer is yes, they can, because driving a car is a privilege, not a right, according to case law.
And that's been debated too at times.
Yes, it has.
That's the status of it. So if someone believes that they were denied the right of due process, do they have to have a lawyer to help them defend it?
Well, that's a very complicated
Very
area of law,
complicated.
so I would not recommend that anybody
Yeah.
try and do that on their own. They do have, if you want to take it a step further with discrimination and violation of your rights under the Equal Protection Clause, they do have human rights commissions
Right.
in every state, and so if they believe there's some type of constitutional violation, you can start there.
Right. And those are designed, their process is designed so people can go in on their own without a lawyer. But if you're trying to enforce a right, in the long run, you may need the help of the court to do that. And that's what federal court's really designed to do, is to help you enforce those rights.
Well, for instance, the ACLU gets involved quite frequently, and something's happening in Barrington right now where someone wrote an email which was perceived to be a threat to the town manager, and now the police department wants to prosecute that person. ACLU steps in and they're saying, no, you're violating this person's right to free speech. Okay, here we go. We're going back to another constitutional
First
issue.
Amendment.
Your First Amendment. So that's what can happen with these due process cases as well, as with the ACLU may be able to step in as well.
So when these cases now specifically regarding immigration are coming up, someone says, you don't understand, I really am here legally, it is my right to be heard. And you're saying that that is the case right now, whether it was this person who was Chinese so many
Right.
years ago, or, well, certainly when Dred Scott and that was happening, a very different story. But they certainly have the right to be heard, and I guess it's important for us to underscore that you wouldn't ever, yet another reason why you wouldn't want to be doing too much to change how the 14th Amendment reads.
Right. Now, here, you can play into this a little bit too. Some of the politics, but the law. As you know, Arizona passed its own immigration laws. Well, immigration should be a federal policy, not a state-by-state policy. And the federal government needs to step up and address how we're going to deal with immigration issues. There are a lot of laws on the books. What's probably happened, and this is more political than legal at this point, is it's gotten a little bit out of hand as to how people are getting into the country, how they're supposed to get into the country, and what they need to be documented and to correct some of that problem. And when I say out of hand, there are people who have been here for many, many years who probably the government should give some process to, if they've been productive members of society, an opportunity to get themselves here legally. But it's something that has to be addressed as a whole, not piecemeal, and not state by state.
I did want to have us have an opportunity to discuss immigration and the legal way that that happens. For years, many even in this Portuguese community that's in East Bay, they certainly were able to be here, not a problem, and immigration seemed to be fairly simple. They may have had to go through some processes of green cards. Go through that a little bit, if you would. There's a green card. It has its stipulations. There is a visa that's a shorter version.
A work visa.
A work visa.
Yeah.
Who gets to have one of that? Those things being tightened up these days, what's legal in terms of immigration these days?
I think it goes back, if I'm wrong, correct me, but during Clinton, he changed the immigration laws, I think.
There were some work
There's-
changes,
okay.
but it goes back even
Work
farther
specifically.
with visitation visas,
Yeah.
and you could come on many different visas. Professional athletes have a special visa for their special talents and abilities, which doesn't apply just to athletics, but to other fields. There are a number of ways to get a visa to come. You're going back, when you were talking about some of this immigration, to the Ellis Island days, so to
Oh,
speak.
that, yeah.
There's
yeah.
that.
You know, and so there were waves of immigration, different people coming from different places.
For different reasons,
For different
too. They were
reasons.
allowed
And it's
passage.
always been the history of this country. I mean, you know, like it or not, when the English came over on the Mayflower, they were immigrants. You know, they were coming to this country. You didn't need a visa then because there was no place to get one. But it's the same idea that people come here, we welcome them, but they've got to come legally, and there's a process to do that. And the process is fairly complicated now, and it's a lot of confusion between people who have gotten their visas and have come legally, maybe have overstayed their visa, and what's the process with them, versus people who never got one in the first place.
That's what I think was referring to, is if they've overstayed their welcome or they're here illegally. I think there was some type of legislation passed during the Clinton administration that changed the way the immigration enforces those laws. It became more prevalent after September 11th.
Yes.
Okay, after September 11th, then immigration was really a hot topic, and now you hear about issues where, for instance, the anchor babies or people being here, they might be here legally on a visa, they get convicted of a crime, and immigration steps in, they look at their law and they say, well, no, that's an aggravated assault or something like that, and they actually get deported.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think historically, as we talked, immigration goes in waves, and so does the anti-immigration feeling. When the
Yeah.
economy is good, you know, people